Okay, well, I'm just gonna get started, and if there's still some people coming in at the beginning, I'm anyways just gonna talk a little introduction, so not that big a deal. Well, first of all, welcome to everyone. Cool mix of places. I'm happy you could join us today. In this first part of this 3 days series, throughout these 3 days, I'm just gonna introduce a little bit of Python programming to you, everyone who's interested in that. And I'm gonna try to do it on a very project-based type of way. So I really want to just make the focus a specific project that I want to build out in this short time that we have, and just discuss programming concepts as they come up. So there's different ways of learning how to program, and there's different opinions on what's the best one. But I personally think that it's really nice it's about problem solving. So there's a specific thing that you want to achieve, and then knowing how to program can often really help you to get it done. And so if you just take step by step and kind of like run into a problem and then solve it when you need it, I think that's a really nice way to tackle this and just stay engaged when you want to learn something. So for today, I want to cover some Python basics at hand of the project of moving a couple of files on your computer. So this is just going to be the topic of the project, and I'm going to introduce it a little more in just a bit. To get started about myself, that's me. I'm Martin. See, this picture was taken a while ago, so the hair has grown in the meantime. I've been working with coding nomads now for a long time, and build out Python courses that's on there on the platform, and also the Django course. And yeah, it's been 5 years teaching Python already. All right, well, that's a long time, but that's fine. Okay, luckily the snake is not around my neck anymore, so I'm happy about that too. So in here, just a second for I'm gonna move something over here. Okay. So in this, these are the things that you're gonna learn in this training. I'm gonna talk over them in just a bit, but essentially my main point for today for you is just to get people who haven't done any programming yet to kind of like understand the point of even wanting to learn to program. Like what is it really that you can do, and how can you actively, see some results pretty quickly in programming. And I think that Python is a great language for that. There's a ton of programming languages out there, and there's different languages you can learn. You can achieve most of the things with any language, really. But so it's a lot about, especially when you're getting started, it's a lot about what's a nice language to start working with. And I think Python is really great for that. And I'm going to show you this by building a little script that does something today. And you're gonna essentially, we're gonna automate a task. So we're gonna move a couple of files. So I have this. Let me show you my desktop here. Oops. I guess gonna make this smaller. Okay. And so I have like a very, very messy desktop over here with just a ton of screenshots on it. And the aim of this little script that I'm going to build now is just going to be able to move all of these files in one go, but make it sure that to clean up my desktop essentially, but do it without, like, I just want to move the screenshots. It's mostly screenshots, but there's this very important TXT file here. It's really, really important. So I don't want to move that. It's got to stay on the desktop, right? And also I don't want to mess around anything with this folder or the SD card that's hanging out here. So I really just want to move the screenshots, and I just want to move them all into one folder to clean up and make this look a little, more human over here. Or maybe that's pretty human to have a messy desktop, I don't know. So this is the project that we're going to build. It's just a small script file that you can then run basically anytime that you want to clean up your desktop. And the point with a lot of automation or programming is also that you invest a little more time up front to build out a script, and then you can just run it from then on anytime and clean up your desktop whenever you make it too messy, essentially. So, and I also wanted to mention that initially we wanted to do this stream on Twitch. We're starting a Twitch stream as well, where we want to have more regular sessions for tutorials and stuff like that. So I'm going to pop this link into the chat, so you can check that out. And if you're interested in having more of these kind of things, then you can subscribe. And same thing for our YouTube channel. We have already a bunch of videos on there, some interesting stuff if you're interested in learning to program. And then, of course, we have our learning platform. That's at platform. There it is. No, we only need that part. And you can sign up there and get started. We have some free resources that you can start learning and go through contents there. Okay, let me go back to this. And you see also while building out, take your time. Okay. So while building this out, there's going to be a couple of concepts that we're covering. These are, a lot of them are fundamental programming concepts, and I'm not really going to go very deeply into them, but I really like to have these sorts of interactions with you in the comments or in the chats. So if there's anything that you're a little confused about, or where you're like, please just go a bit deeper in that specific part, then you can do that. Just ping me on the chat. I have it up there. I can see it in front of me. So I mean, otherwise Kim's gonna ping me if I miss a message or something. But yeah, just feel free to say what you want to know about more, and then we can go into that. Okay, that's it for now. I can come back to this a little later on. And now I'm here. Okay, so I've got this really messy desktop, so it's time that I start doing something about that, right? And the tool that I will be using for this is called the text editor. I'm using Visual Studio Code. There's a bunch of other ones. PyCharm for Python development, or Sublime Text are common ones. You could even just use a normal text editor, like any text editor. Programming is really just writing text. So wherever you can write text, you can build a program. But there are some advantages to using IDEs and text editors like this. And I'm going to show you this just to get started. So I'm opening up a new window here, just covering all the mess. And so there are three parts really that you need when you want to work on a program. One is, of course, the place where you can write your code. Let me make that a bit bigger too, so that everyone can see. Okay, so this is, you can see it's a file, and I can just write some text in here. This is where I'm going to write my script. And then I'm going to need a file system, so something where I can just figure out where I am on my operating system, and that's here built in. Doesn't make so much sense right now because I just have a new window, but I will show you this again when there's a file structure too. And then the third part is a terminal. And in VS Code, you can just pull down here from the bottom up, or go to File, somewhere in here, View, Terminal. There it is, to switch it on. And then this pops up here in the bottom. And these three different parts really, the two that we're going to focus on most is really the place where you write the code, and then the place where you run the code, which is the terminal. And VS Code also makes that running the code easier by having a little button that is now, because I made it a little too big. Let me see if I can get that back. No, that's just because I haven't saved it yet, right? So right now, VS Code doesn't know even what this is about. It's just an empty file without anything in there. So at first I got to tell it that I want to write a Python script. The name of the program is VS Code, Visual Studio Code. Maybe Kim or Ryan can pull up a link. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is, as I just said, for now I just have an open file that's not even saved at all. So I'm going to save it and make sure that it's a Python file. So I'm pressing Command Save, or you can also go to File, Save, and then just put it somewhere. I will put it, of course, on my desktop, right? That's where these things should go with. I just got something in the way here. All right. So I give it a name, and I'm going to call this one move.py. So for Python files, you have a file extension that is .py. And that's how I'm telling the Visual Studio Code editor that what I want to work in here with, what I want to work with in here is a Python code. If I would be writing some other language, I'd have to change the extension here. And that's just so that the operating system knows what to use, what interpreter to use. Cool. So I saved this. You see, I got the file name up here. It tells me where it is. Now, also when I open this up, It still doesn't show it. So I can open up the desktop in here, I guess. We're going to see the whole mess. Now you see the file system here. So we're not really going to use this much in this example because I'm just writing a single script. But if you have a bigger project where you have a couple of files that interact with each other, then it's really important that you can see them here on the side as well. But now we're just working with this one file essentially. So I'm going to click it away, and we don't really have to look at it more today. Cool. So how to get started is like one of the difficult tasks when you're completely new to programming. It's a bit the question of what are you even going to do? I have this empty file here, and I know I can write some text that somehow does something, but what's that going to be, right? And from this project-centric perspective, essentially what you want to do is you want to start by thinking about what is the plan, what is your plan? What's the project that you want to do? And then just write it down in something that's called pseudocode, which is just giving yourself instructions on what is the code functionality that you eventually want to build out, okay? In Python, as far as I know, all coding languages, programming languages have some sort of code comments. In Python, those are start with a hashtag. So when I write a hashtag somewhere, it means that when Python, the program Python runs my script, it's just going to ignore whatever I write down here. So anything that I write down here, Python is not going to deal with. It's not Python code. And I'm using these code comments to write some pseudocode. I just want to map out my thought process of what is it that I want to do here. And I always recommend everyone to do that because it's the best way to get started. You can break things down into smaller chunks and then just figure out really what is the task that you want to achieve. In this case, the overall task was clean the desktop, right? And now I can think about what are some steps that I have to do here. I'm probably gonna need to know about the different, like where are my files? So I need to locate the desktop from within my Python script. Then I need to, and I'm just brainstorming here, right? There's no right or wrong way to write these types of pseudocode. It's really whatever helps you to map out your thought process. Okay, so I need to locate the desktop. I need to identify what's a screenshot. Screenshots, right? Because I don't want to move the important text file that's on here. So I just want to make sure that I only move the screenshots. Then I don't really have a place to put stuff yet. So I'm also going to need to create a directory. Create directory or folder, right? And then, well, then I got to move them. Move the files. So this would be just all of these are code comments. So if I would run this Python file right now with Python, nothing would happen because Python just ignores every single line that's in there right now. And this code comments, in this case, it's a special version of code comments if you want to say so, but just conceptually, because it's pseudocode that helps me to organize my thought process. And they're really always here just for you as a developer and for any potential future developers who might come into this code of yours. And this always happens, even if it's just yourself in a couple of months or whatever. It's very easy to forget what's been going on in your code. So leaving some sort of comments that make it explain a little what's this about and why you did things in a certain way is always very helpful. Okay, so Python comes with something that's called the standard library, which is a bunch of code that comes with the language when you install it. And that you can, but it is not automatically part of just running something, but you need to import it. That the point of this is really so that you can be more specific and pick and choose what types of functionality do you want in your program, what do you need, and keep your code base rather small. And so for interacting with your file paths, which is something that you're going to have to do if you want to work on your operating system, right? You want to be able to actually make a change on your operating system. So you need to be able to interact with the file path. And Python has a library for that is pretty nice because it allows, it works the same across different operating systems. So you can use the same code for Python, for Linux, and also for macOS. And that's inside of something called pathlib. Yeah. And specifically, there's something that we want to use for this from this pathlib thing. So this is it's a bunch of code, and you just want to pick out a specific one. So you can say, I'm just making this more specific. The other thing would also work. But what I want to use in here is the path object. And objects, don't worry about. I'm gonna be throughout this stream. I'm gonna be using a couple of words that might be foreign, or maybe you heard about them, or you're not quite sure on what it is. Like objects, what's an object? Don't worry about those too much. Of course, if there's something that really confuses you, please just pop it into the chat, and then we can talk about it. But I will talk more about objects the day after tomorrow, where we're going to go a bit into object-oriented programming. And that's just, it's a way of programming, and a lot in Python is built around that concept. So when I use something, when I import it, it's often an object. You can just think about it like that. But the main idea is an object is a thing. It's a very rough way of talking about it. It's a thing, and then you can do something with that thing. Okay, so I want to work with path objects because they allow me to interact with my file system. So I'm getting access to them by importing them. And I don't need to install anything for that aside from Python, because that's part of the so-called standard library. That's just code that comes with it when you install Python. Cool. Okay, so I can make this a task, but it's not really necessary. Get my tools would be getting this path object. Okay. And you see, I'm just trying to write the code to the specific tasks in my pseudocode. So now my next task is going to be locating the desktop. And also, of course, what you're going to need to do for this, let me write this line of code, and then we're going to run this script also, because I haven't run it yet. So there's no output to view yet, but so far also there's nothing that we did yet. Let me actually do that up first. So I just want to show you how to run this script. So I'm just going to put in a print call, where I say hello. And what this does in Python, the print function just gives output to your terminal. So down here, you're going to see the word hello printed out when I run this file. And there's different ways of running this file. You can run it from the command line. You need to navigate to the place where you are and then execute it with Python. I'm going to show you this as well. Or actually, I'm going to show you this first. So you know that I saved it on a desktop. So it's going to be on here. And that means I can say Python, which is saying use the Python program to run this file. And the file is called move.py. And here I'm pressing the tab character to autocomplete it. You don't need the boilerplate. What sort of boilerplate do you mean? That's a comment from Apple. HTML. No, so I'm not working with HTML here at all. I'm just working with Python as a programming language, and HTML is a way that you construct websites, but it doesn't, in itself, it doesn't have anything to do with programming. It's just it's a code. It is code, but you're not actually doing any functionality with HTML. It's just a markup language. So yeah, but we will tomorrow. I'm going to work a little with HTML as well, just a tiny bit. But we're going to build out a website using Python code. So we're going to run some code that then builds a website for you, essentially. So if you're interested in that, check it out tomorrow. Cool. Okay, so what I was just saying here is I'm using the Python program, and you need to have Python installed for this to work and be in the right place, so that I can just directly say run this move.py file. Now I press enter, and you can see that it executes the code that's in there. What it really executes in this file is this line of code, the ones that are not green, right? So this line of code, it imports the path object. It doesn't do anything with it right now because I haven't used it. It's just importing it. So this is completely useless for the script that I have right now. But the only thing that really does anything is it's printing back this word to the console. So I execute this script, this file, the Python interpreter checks what's in there and sees what it can work with, which are these two lines, and then performs those actions. All right, so let's do something more interesting, right? I'm going to get rid of this again and go back to the task of locating the desktop. Oh, I wanted to show you this as well, and I nearly forgot. An easier way to run this file in VS Code is like this. You can do this anywhere. Like you just need a normal terminal and you can run it with these commands. But when you're within VS Code or most other IDEs, you have some sort of run button, and that is up here in the top right in VS Code, and you can click this, and then you also see now maybe you can already interpret what's going on here. So it gives you a path to the Python interpreter. So before I just wrote only this word, only Python, which is somewhere inside of my system. This is linked, right? It knows that when I just say Python, it should actually use this whole path to find the program. And so, and then it's also saying, okay, execute this specific file. And here again, it's giving an absolute path. That just means it goes from the very, very bottom of your computer, which is the slash, that's where it starts. That's where everything lives, essentially. And it goes to users, my user, onto the desktop, and then it finds the file there that it executes. So we get an absolute path to the Python interpreter and then absolute path to the file. It runs, and that's it. So if you press this play button, I just think this is something interesting to know. It does the same thing as if you would type it in here, right? It just does the same thing for you. It's a shortcut to make your life easier. Okay, so finally, now we're gonna get to locating the desktop. And how does that work? Let me see. Another thing, so yeah, okay. Another thing that's interesting to know about is that you have two ways essentially of running Python. One is the one I just showed you, that you write a script, and that's the one that throughout most of, if you go into programming, that's what you're mostly going to do. You write scripts, you execute the scripts, and you get your output or your functionality. But there's also a second way of doing things, which is the Python interpreter, and you can start that by just giving Python without any other file name after it. So if I just type Python, then it opens up the Python interpreter for me in the terminal. And in here, I can directly run Python code. So what happens here is I type something. So let's do the same thing that I did before. I type something in here and then press enter, and it executes it right away. And you see there's this chevron prompt pops up again. So Python's waiting for my input again. It's essentially that they're listening to me and whatever I want to do. As long as I write valid Python code, it's going to execute it for me. So I can say 42 plus 3. You can do simple calculations like that in Python directly. No need to do anything else. I get my output here, and it's waiting again for some new input. And this is a helpful way of, like quickly testing something. If you want to, I don't know, you have some idea of a functionality, you don't exactly remember how it works. This happens all the time. Then you can quickly hop into the interpreter and just play around with it. So I have the same possibilities that I have inside of the script, but it just executes line by line. So if you want to write anything longer, you might understand this is like, it gets kind of messy. You can't really write it in the interpreter. So that's what scripts are for, and that's why you're usually going to be using scripts. But yes, for experimentation and for quick one-off things, it's useful to know also about the interpreter. And I'm going to use it for a little experimentation now. So I'm going to do the same thing I did in the script. From pathlib, import path. Okay, no output. I'm just now have access to this path object. And let's see what this is. What happens if I do just path? Okay, so this is what I get as an output. Doesn't really tell us much. But there is some sort of output, some sort of thing got created if I do this. So there's things on objects very often that are called methods, and you can call them like this. So this would be the name of a method. And you separate it from the object with a dot in here. Again, if this goes over your head, don't worry about it. Come back in 2 days, and then we're going to talk more about that. But for now, just accept that there is something, objects have some sort of methods, and methods essentially are there to do something with the object. And I can call them. That's the terminology that we use when we talk about programming stuff with these brackets in Python. That's how this works. So if I say make a path object, this is what I'm saying here, and then call this method on the path object. And you see I'm testing out what happens when I do this, and it's asking for the current working directory. and it gives me as an output user Martin desktop. And maybe this is familiar. You saw it up here, right? This is the path on my file system where the file is located. Okay, so the execution of this specific terminal session, I'm currently on the desktop. So when I start the interpreter and I run this, what's my current working directory, it tells me, okay, it's the desktop. Okay, this is nice. So you already have the desktop located with this, but only in this specific case. Okay, so because this current working directory, if you were in a different folder, not in the desktop, then this wouldn't work. Then it would give you a different output. So, but you need to know, looking back into this, right? We need to actually always know where the desktop is, not just coincidentally, essentially, because the script is currently on the desktop. Because maybe you're going to move it into a different folder, but you still want to be able to, for the script to find the desktop. So the path object has another method that you can call, which is home. And when I run this, it always takes me to the path to my home directory. So this current working directory is going to be something different every time that you call it from a different place. Would this code work in cross-platform between OS X and Windows? Yes, that's the nice thing, and that's also why I'm using this pathlib in Python. There's other packages that are part of the standard libraries such as OS. So there's an older one called OS that you can also use to interact with your file system. But stuff gets really messy because paths is one of those things that are very different between those different operating systems, and the pathlib library takes care of that actually. So you could run the same code in Python and it would work as well. You would, so the difference that you would see is that this, instead of saying POSIX path, which I think it's going to say both for any Unix systems or both for Linux and Mac OS, here it would say Windows path instead, but the code would work completely the same. Okay, what else do we have? Okay, yeah, so this, calling this home method on my path object is always going to give me my home directory. Okay, so all right, that's nice. It's not yet the desktop. So let's see what you can do. Another method that this path library has is called join path, and this is a way that you can just keep adding, keep moving through directories essentially. So you can, if you think of this file path as steps you take. So you start in users, then you move into Martin, then you move into desktop. So these are all different folders essentially, and you can step through this with pathlib as well by just giving the names into join path. So I can say from my home directory, uses Martin, take a step into desktop by putting this join path method at the end of it. And you see, our output is now uses Martin desktop. There is another syntax also that if you're new to Python, it's not going to be confusing because you haven't worked with Python yet. But if you are, this is something specific to the pathlib library. You can use this, just the slash, to achieve the same thing. Like it's a shortcut for using this join path method, essentially. So if I do this, then I'll get the same output. And you could keep going. So I can go from desktop. Well, I don't know if I have a folder there. I think I have one called cool secret stuff. Let's try. Yeah, and then you see, you can just keep building your paths like that with the slash or using this join path. I'm gonna stick with using join path because it's a little more familiar. Oh, if you know methods, then it's a little more familiar. Okay, so this code here that I now wrote inside of my Python interpreter, right? I'm just experimenting. After you did the path.home command, does it change your current working directory? No, it doesn't. So as of now, this doesn't do anything. It just creates the path objects. Okay, so there's no, let's get out of it. I'm just gonna copy this. If you think of doing the same thing in Bash, right? So I want to step one back. So now I'm so now I'm using a different different programming language, and this is where you see that also like a lot in programming is you have to be a little multilingual if you want to do much with programming, but it's not that much. Like if you know a little bit of Bash, this is the programming language I'm using right now on Unix systems, and Windows has something else, but PowerShell, I think it's what it's called. But there's also options to get a Unix system to work on Windows, especially recently they introduced some options for that. So this is something that a lot of people, Bash is something that a lot of people use to move around in their file system and do some tasks on, for example, tasks like moving the screenshots around. It's something you could also easily do with Bash. It's just a different approach, a different programming language. And now there's a command. I just remembered why I started saying this. Thanks for the comment. If I want to move to a different directory now, I would say, okay, go to my desktop. That's the command in Bash, cd, change directory to desktop. And now if I check again the working directory, then you see that it changed. So here I'm in one directory, and now it points to a different directory. But with the path objects, and that's to answer your question, with the path objects, nothing yet changes. You're really just constructing this object that you then want to work with. Also, path.current directory, working directory is always going to be a working directory, and path.home is always going to be your home directory. Okay, Mark is saying, if you're using OneDrive and sync your desktop, the location is super weird, by the way, for your desktop. Yeah, I can imagine that. That sounds like something I would prefer to not touch, to be honest. It's nice to kind of like know where your files are. But yeah, I'm sure, I don't know anything about it, but I'm sure you could figure out also what the exact file system is in there. Okay, back to the actual task. Let's revisit. We want to clean the desktop. So far you imported the tools here, and now next step was to locate the desktop. For this, we hopped over into the Python interpreter and then found out that this call, like using one of these path objects, making one of them, then calling the home method on it to find the home folder, and then move from there into the desktop. This is a way that you can be sure that you're always on your desktop. Doesn't matter where you run the script from. Cool. So this is how you could locate the desktop. Now, one thing you might have noticed when we were over in the interpreter is that maybe you have not. So let's just take another look. So I'm going to do the same thing from pathlib import path, and then I will run this. Okay. So I do get the right output, but it's essentially lost. I don't really have any access to it anymore once I run this, which is not very optimal because you do want to do something with this, right? So if I just say 42, I get some output or make a calculation. This works, right? But I don't have any access to whatever this outputs unless I assign it to a variable. And that's one very fundamental concept in programming, is that you can assign these values, the output that comes here, to variables, and then you can work with it later on again. So I could say my number is 40 plus 2. Okay, so here I have a calculation. Python's gonna execute this calculation and assign the output just like it threw it out here at the bottom. Instead of throwing it out, it's just gonna assign it to this variable name. So I say this, you see there's no output now because instead of kicking it back into the console, what it does is it kicks it into this number. So now I have an association for when I say number, it knows that what I actually mean is 42. And that's so doing this is called variable assignment, and in Python you're using this equal sign to do that. So it's not really an equal sign in the mathematical sense, but it's an assignment. You can think of it like I sometimes not with zeros. I sometimes think of it like an error. That's the pointing. This name is now pointing to the result of this thing, and this doesn't have to be a calculation. This could be anything. I could say greeting equals hello. You might also notice that I'm treating like numbers differently here, that I'm treating text. text in Python has to go into quotes, and you can use double quotes or single quotes, but it has to be wrapped in quotes. That's something you're going to discover when you work a little more. There's like different data types, and they have different ways that you can interact with them. So I can do some stuff to numbers that I can't do to a text, which in Python it's called a string, and the other way around. And then there's some things that you can do to both of them. It just depends on what's the structure of the data that you're using. But I said we make this project oriented, so we don't really need to talk about this very much right now. What we need here, though, is you need to have access to this path that you just created. So it's necessary that you assign it to a variable that you can later work with it again. So I'm going to call this one desktop. And this is another thing about making variables. And it's related to writing your code comments, is that you always want to make sure that it's as descriptive as possible. So I could name this anything, right? This is just a name. I could name it donkey or whatever I wanted to, but that's not a great name for it, because when I come back and read this code, I'm not gonna remember why I made a bad joke and called my desktop donkey, right? So just programming is a very creative activity, but you shouldn't be too creative when you make variable names, but just rather be descriptive and also not cryptic. Some people like to be very cryptic and they just call this D and use these single letter variables because there's some tiny maybe performance improvement, if even, or they just want to make their code as small as possible. And that's also, it's really not worth it. Unless you're working in very specific applications, it's the most important thing, and the thing that you want to optimize for when you program is always readability of your code. Okay, I'm just going to put this out there for anyone who's thinking of getting started. Try to optimize for that, because when you can make your code in a way that it's easy for you to read, to remember what it's about, and for other people to get in and understand what it's about, then you save so much time and money, developer time, and also just headaches. So keep that in mind. All right. So this is tested. We found out it locates the desktop correctly, and now it's assigned to a variable as well. So let's put a check to this. The desktop is located. What's next? Now we need to identify the screenshots. Okay, so actually, let me print that out. So that's another way of doing something similar to what we did down here in the console. So I'm just like writing some code to test this out, my script. And what I'm doing here is just putting in a print statement so that I can get some feedback to my console when I run this script. This is just doing essentially the same steps that I did before, step by step, but now Python just does them for me and I don't have to type them piece by piece. And I am getting, it's a little confusing, but here is the output. So this is Martin desktop. This is what this call gets, assigns to the desktop variable, and then prints out here. Cool. Okay, so what we want to do, identify the screenshots. Yes. So now let's take a look at this again. Now you're in a situation where you actually have to deal with a lot of things at the same time. So there's a bunch of screenshots up on here, right? And one of the nice things about programming, or one of the things that computers are good in, is scaling stuff. So doing something many times for like writing something once and then performing it many times. So similar to making the script so that you can run it anytime you want to. There's also something to be said about just dealing with a ton of files at the same time. And often if you want to do something, if you want to do the same thing to a lot of files or a lot of objects or whatever, a lot of things, you can use loops for that. Loops are structures, command structures in programming that tell you, that say, do this thing many times to all of these things in the collection, essentially. Let's look at that. So I'm just gonna, my point here is, okay, there's a lot of screenshots. So if there's a lot of things and you want to do something to them, in this case, identifying them, or later you want to move them, right? So if you want to do something for a lot of things, then often the right answer for this is a loop. And I'm gonna show you how a loop works right now. And let's start by just a simple loop. So I'm gonna say for a character in the word hello. Okay. I want to print out each character. This doesn't have anything to do with the screenshots right now, so then let's not confuse this. And for loops in Python. So just as a simple example, okay? And one thing that I like about Python 2 is that it really sometimes reads pretty like English, like natural, the natural English language, even if you can't speak it. Okay, so because if you think of this, what it says is for every character inside of the word hello, I want to print out each character. It's a little abstracted because that's just, it needs to be precise for programming so that it works, but it's still relatively understandable. And this works because hello, the string here, is a collection in Python. So it's really a composite from many single characters, okay? Oops, I don't want to move this, right? But you can think of a string as a collection. It's a collection of characters. And that's why I can use a for loop on it, because there's many characters in here and I want to do something, in this case, just print it out to each of those characters. So when I run this, I get as an output each separate character printed out to the console. And this is just the default how print does it. It starts a new line every time. But that's the power of using a for loop. I can just say, do something, and there could be more interesting things that I do to this than just printing them out, but do something to each of those items in the collection. Now, this path object also has a collection included in it that you can access, and you can get it by saying whatever the path object is. So now I'm using the reference to it, right? This is what we assigned to desktop. So this now references my path object. And then I can say iter dir. And you see also some nice thing about using an IDE like VS Code or some of the other ones is that they have this auto completion. So it inspects, it knows what my variable points to. It knows this is a path object, and it knows that the path object has a method on it that's called iter dir. So if I just start typing, then it already gives me suggestions here, and I can press the tab character to autocomplete it, and then I have this here. All right. So this method on a path object creates a list essentially, or like a collection of all of the files that are on there. So it's similar to looking at it like this, right? So it's going to have a collection of all of these things, which is mostly screenshots, and then the script that we're currently writing, and then some important text file, whatever. Let's take a look. If I print this out, this might be a little confusing, but let's do it anyways. If I print this out, you might expect that you're going to actually see this list, but you're not going to see it because of this is some performance thing that Python says this is a generator object. So it's a collection that doesn't yet exist. So it's a little confusing, but you don't really have to worry about it right now. But it creates it as it goes over it. That's what generators do. So it still is, if you see something like that anywhere and you see like generator, okay, then you know it's a collection and you know you can use a for loop on it. Start doing this. So I want to go for file. I'm just going to call it F now, because file is kind of like a keyword that you don't necessarily want to use as a variable name. So now I'm doing a letter variable in this case. Yeah, this is also interesting for loops. Maybe if you've never seen those before, whatever you define, this is just a variable name, just like desktop was a variable name that you assigned before. You can just use this. And the point is that when you open up the body of the for loop down here, you have access to this F without, and it's going to change for each iteration of the loop. So this is going to look at this method here. It's going to create this generator object, which allows you to look at every single file that is on that location. And then the for loop assigns it to this variable every time a new to f, and then you can print it out. So this f is going to be, for each iteration, it's going to be a new file, whatever file is on there. So now when I run this, you're going to get more similar to what you might have expected before. You see a list of everything that's on the desktop, right? Tons of stuff, mostly screenshots. Now this is really long, so you can make this a little shorter by each of those things. Again, that's just how iter_dir is set up, on path objects are set up. Each of these things are path objects themselves, and they have certain also attributes on them. So there's methods that do something that end with this brackets, and then there's attributes on them that they don't necessarily need to do something, they're already there. One of them is name, and this is just gonna give you, instead of the full path here, right, it's just gonna give you the name of the file. So if I do this and run the code, I'm gonna get a very similar output, but without the path before it. Okay, and there's more stuff. There is something called suffix. Yeah, we run that. What you get is all of the different suffixes. So you see there's lots of PNG files. There's something without anything because it's a folder. There's this one Python file, etc. So you can pick different pieces from these path objects. Is it possible to open these screenshots that have pooped up in the editor? Where would you want to open them up is the question. Like within Python, you don't really want to open them up because you could open them up, but what you would see if you open them up inside of Python is, so those are great screenshots. They're just screenshots of the desktop. It gets more messy and more messy. But what you have to think about, what is a picture really for a computer? And so the way that you could open this up in Python is, as you can think of it like a matrix consisting of a lot of pixels, and each of those pixels has certain numerical values. So I don't know this off the top of my head, but let's say blue is, I can actually make it up, I guess. It's RGB values. There's red, green, and blue. So all of these pixels here would maybe be 0 for red, 0 for green, and 265 for blue. And that's just 3 numbers essentially that make up what colors are being displayed. So if you actually wanted to open up one of those files inside of Python, that's what you could get. You could get a huge matrix of numbers, which is probably not what you're thinking about right here, but it's an interesting thing to think about, that how a picture is actually represented on a computer. But from Bash, for example, you could use a program to open them up. There's a command called open. So I could say open screenshot like that, .png, I believe. And then it's going to open it up. It does not exist because there's a lot of them. So I'd have to figure out what exactly. There's one that's easy, 38.png. And then it's going to open it up for me in whatever program is defined to open it up. It's maybe fun to know. You can do this with a lot of files. If you just use open and Bash knows about what's the right program for this type of file, then it's going to open it up for you. Okay, back to this. So you've seen that you can iterate over all the files that are on the desktop. You can see that you can print something out. You know that these are path objects as well, and that path objects have certain attributes to them. Like, for example, I can just pick out the name, or I can just pick out the file ending, the suffix. And how could this come in handy? Which is what we have still our heading here. We want to identify what are actually screenshots, right? So with this f.suffix, you saw that there is a way where you can see that I can distinguish between what is a screenshot and what is not a screenshot just by looking at this suffix, because all of my screenshots here have the ending .png. Yours might have a different ending, but generally your screenshots have a specific file extension, and other files have a different file extension. So this is a way that we could potentially identify what's a screenshot and what is not a screenshot. So we need to do some sort of filtering here, that we don't move all of the files that are on there, but only pick out the ones that are actually relevant. Okay, so let's see. For this, I'll have to introduce something else, because now how do you do any sort of filtering, right? You want Python to be able to look at each of those files, which were there at this point, right? Python is able to look at each of those files, but now you want to say do something specific if it's a screenshot, and don't do that if it's not a screenshot. And those structures are called conditional statements, and they start with an if, which is again like just making programming a little easier, because you can just think of it as language. So what I want to say here is, if the suffix of the file that the loop is currently looking at, yeah, equals, and this is Python's way of it's called the equality operator, and it's the way of saying, is this thing the same thing as this other thing? Okay, so you can say if this is .png, because you see that that's what the output is that we get. Yeah. And then again, you open up with colons, so similar as you did here with the for loop. There's this colon and the indentation, which is something that has meaning in Python. So I'm not just doing this because it looks nicer or it's easier to conceptualize, but this is actually necessary in Python for it to run. There's a lot of programming languages where that's not the case, and you decide what is part of a loop by using brackets like that, for example, right? So then it wouldn't matter. Then I could have this here, and you could have this here, or even in the same line. But Python is not like that. Python requires you to use this indentation. It's part of the language. And what it tells Python is that, okay, everything that's indented 1 is part of this for loop. So all of this is part of the for loop. And then what it tells you here is everything that's indented 1 from here is part of this if conditional statement. Okay, that's just how Python does things. Yes, and what you want to do here, so in this case, all right, we can just say if the suffix is .png, then print out the name of the file. So now if I run this again, it's not going to give me all of the files like it did before, screenshot, screenshot, screenshot. Most of them are screenshots, but there's also a folder somewhere hidden in here. I'm not finding it. But if I now print this out, it's only going to give me the names of the actual screenshots. And to drive this point home, I'm going to show you how to say do something if it's not the same thing. So there's the equality operator, and then does not equal is another operator that, as you might guess, does the opposite. So it's saying if the ending is not the .png, then print out the name of the file. So I can run this, and now it's a little easier to see the results. You get just a txt file, some hidden file, another hidden file that just exists in Mac folders, then here a folder, and then the script that we're currently working with. Would I be able to do a contain instead of suffix? What do you mean with that? If the word, you're saying like if the name of the file contains something? Yes, that's possible. You'd have to build it out a little differently. But you can search in strings, and you can also, there's a bunch of string methods. We can quickly look at a few of them. So for example, so let's have our greeting string. Again, not good practice, but because we're just doing something quick here, that's not a script that I'm writing. It's okay. So there's like methods also on strings. So in the same way that you saw, like there's these methods on this path object, also strings have the same thing. And I can do something like starts with X. So now I'm asking, does this string start with an X? And Python's gonna answer me either yes or no. And in Python, those things are called Boolean values. They're true or false. And they're another data types, like in the same way that a string is a data type or that a number is a data type. And they are always just either true or false. So they're, if you can think of them as like the thing that's the most closest to how computers actually operate, because it's like 1 and 0. It's on or off. It's true or false. And then a lot of these methods return this type of stuff. So does it start with an H? No, because it's a capital H by accident. Does it start with a small h? Yes. Yeah, it doesn't work with contains, I believe. We can give it a try though. I don't think contains is a method as far as I know. So this would be LO in our example, right? Okay, so it's a good intuition, because that's essentially what you want to do. Does this contain this other thing? But Python's telling you, okay, no, so this doesn't exist. Python is just not set up in that way that it would have a method that's called contains. But it's generally a good way to go and just test it out, because you're not really going to break anything, right? Python's just going to give you feedback and tell you, sorry, we don't have that thing. But often when you go down with that gut feeling and you're like, I want to know if this contains that, and you spell it out in Python, often it actually works because the language is designed in a way that it's pretty intuitive, the words that are being used. But there's other things you can do. Yes, for example, you could use the in operator. That's a way. Or you could find something in a string. You could find substrings in a string. This would give me not a true or false, but it would give me the location of where does this start in the string. And you remember, it's a collection. Yeah, so this is a couple of items in there, and it tells me where does this substring start. So that's a way to do it. Or you could use the in operator. That's another option as well, yeah. So I could say LO in hello. And Python tells me, yep, that's true. It's in there. So that's a lot of stuff to read. String, substring. Yeah, you can use the string exactly like Ryan wrote just now. You can use this as well. So I could say if there's a .png inside of the name, probably would be a good way to go. So an alternative to write this would be if .png in f.name, then do something. This would achieve the same thing, right? So let's just look at it, the output as well. I'm gonna exit the interpreter, and let's do the same thing just because it's easier to see. We have in and not in. So again, I'm gonna do the not equals just because it's easier to see. I can run this, and you can see that there's the exact same output that you get here. What the screenshots? Test 0, 1, 2. What was that? I'm not sure I understand this comment mark. String slicing and searching for the last 3 letters of the file could also work. Correct, yes. Another way that we could do this is you could say, all right, so you could go a bunch of ways down here. So what Ben was saying here is you could also say, if you could even do, one of the functions we looked at before was string dot ends with. No, I think we looked at starts with, but there's this ends with. So you could do .png, right? And then instead of string, you would say f.name ends with png. Or you could slice it. You could, what Ben suggested, you could say f.name, the last 3, are they going to be png? That would be -1, 2, 3. So I'd have to do like this for it to work. Or go -4 and then have the dot in there. So there's this, and this is interesting, right? There's a lot of different ways that you could achieve the same thing. And that's generally a nice thing about programming. It's not like a lot of people before they get started, I think, or maybe also when they're in the beginning of starting to program, they're like very, very stuck on things have to happen in a very specific way because computers are so, they're just so stuck on having things done very clearly, whatever. But that's true. Like you have to be explicit, but at the same time, there's a lot of different ways that you can achieve the same thing. And then there's often the question, what should you do? And the answer is it doesn't really matter as long as it works, especially when you're getting started. I would just say get it to work. And then maybe something to keep in mind is that if there is a library like Pathlib that you're using, for example, then try to stay within what the library offers. That's the best practice, that you just, so we saw all of these other things would work, but I would still suggest that you stick with using Suffix just because it's part of the Pathlib library. All right. We're already in for an hour, I see, so I should probably speed this up a little. But we've already done a part of the program as well. So we're ready to identify the screenshots. Now there's something else. We need a place to, so, okay, I'm gonna leave this as it is for now, okay? We know we can identify only the screenshots with this conditional statement, yeah? And we want to do something to them only if they're screenshots. Then we want to move them. If not, then we don't do anything if they don't end like that. There's different clauses to conditional statements. There's something called an else statement where you could write code that should happen if this condition doesn't catch, right? But in this case, we don't even need that because we just want to do something if it catches. Thank you. Cool. All right, so let's try to, what we need next is we need a folder, because currently I don't have anything on here. I do have a folder, but that's cool secret stuff. I don't want to just dump the screenshots in there. I don't want to do that. So I want to make a new folder on here, okay? And again, so I know these things because I've worked with the Pathlib library before, but you can always, like if you don't know what do you exactly want to achieve, right? So you can always just go to Google and say Pathlib. Now our task is essentially, maybe you can just use your pseudocode and punch it in there, create a new folder Python or something, essentially just type out your thoughts and Google it. And then you're gonna get a Stack Overflow answer, for example, or you're gonna get the link to the documentation. And it's generally a good idea. Like you can look up things all the time when you do some programming. There's so much information out there, and it's really, you can't just keep everything in your head. So things that you use often, they're slowly going to start sticking, but still, even if like there's always something, you can go and look it up. Here's an example. We talked about this Windows path, POSIX path in the Pathlib library. And then in here, maybe a new folders. I'm just searching. That's not very effective here. Okay, because let's say I don't know the right method right now, or so how do I find out what's the right thing to do? Now I look at this Stack Overflow question, Pathlib. Okay, so there we have it. It's called mkdir. And if you're familiar with Bash programming, it's the same command to make a folder, a directory also in Bash. Okay, so now I can go back here and I say .mkdir. And then I have the documentation of this specific method on this path object in here. And what it does, it creates a new directory at this given path. If mode is given, it's combined with process, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Often when you read this type of documentation, just stick with the stuff that's important to you. Don't try to understand everything. There's way too much in the world. Sometimes you have to cut and just be like, okay, this is what I want to know. And I get the information, I'm going to move on. One thing that might be interesting for us here, though, is that it says if the path already exists, file exists error is raised. Okay, maybe that would, if you're raising an error, that means that your script would quit. And maybe that's not exactly what you want in this case. Maybe you instead want the script just to continue even if the folder already exists. And it looks like there's an option for this. If exists okay is false, which is the default, then file exists error is raised if the target directory already exists. And then if exists okay is true, then they will be ignored. So then the script is not gonna quit even if the folder already exists. So if you run it the second time and the folder got created, then this is maybe a flag that we want to pass in there as well. Okay, so we have some code to create this folder. Let's try that out. I'm gonna say, well, where do you want to create it? On here, on the desktop. It's just a little bit of cleaning. We don't make it too clean. So desktop on this path. You remember before we did the same thing with join path, right? So now I'm creating a new folder. So for now, I'm just giving it a name. I'm going to call it screenshots. Yeah. So this creates a new path object at user/Martin/desktop/screenshots. And now this doesn't exist yet. So I want to say, I call another method on it. I say mkdir. And you see there's also like, again, some nice help from VS Code. And it says exists okay. Is what we just read up in the documentation, might be a good thing to pass. Exist okay. True. You see I'm using a Boolean value, this true or false, which is often used for these types of flags. That I'm just telling it, okay, I'm fine with it. If the folder already exists, it's fine, don't error. And yeah, just make this folder. So I'm creating the directory here. And now we're already, well, let's run it, right? Let's take a look. See if it really worked. So if I run this file and then look at my desktop, there it is. Now you have a screenshots folder sitting on here. So that's nice. It just interacted directly with my file system and created a folder on here out of the Python script that I'm writing. I think that's kind of cool. And that's like one of the first things that I really enjoyed about programming is you do something, you write a little script, and then you see the effects happening on your file system. It's kind of nice. So, and now let's also test this just for the fun of it. If I would remove this exist okay is true, and I run this file again, now we already have the screenshot folder. You can see that I get this file exist error, just being very nice, telling me what's going on. This screenshots folder already exists, so I can create it, and the script quit. So anything that would happen afterwards, oops. I forgot some brackets. So this is not going to print out because my script is going to break before it gets there. That's something you can keep in mind, that like if you run into any sort of exception and you don't catch this exception, then your script is going to exit. So if I run this, you see whatever happened before happens, but as soon as it runs into this error, the script quits, and what happens afterwards doesn't happen anymore, which in the case of our script here wouldn't be very helpful because we do want to move those screenshots, right? So again, I'm going to say exist okay equals true. Let's keep this in there and I run it now. Okay, hello is printing. So the code afterwards is going to run even though the directory already exists. Okay, so we're already nearly there. Now, the last thing we want to do is move all the files. Because it's a lot of files, there's a little flag. You can be like, okay, this is probably going to be a loop, and we're going to do it with a loop as well. So I can just say for, yeah, okay, so I can say for every file. Actually, we can just reuse the for loop that we have up there. Get rid of this, because this is where we're filtering, right? So I only want to move this specific this specific PNG files. So the functionality of moving is actually something that can come in here into this if conditional statement in here. So I'm going to move my pseudocode around, and that's also something you don't have to stick with the exact structure that you initially mapped out when you write some pseudocode, because I was just thinking it up very, very high level of what is kind of what I want to achieve, and then just now I'm trying to tackle each step step by step. And in this process, stuff is going to move around because if I just knew how to do things off the top of my head, right, like that, I wouldn't really need anything. But this is just normal. The programs move; they're alive. They're not really alive. It would be kind of scary. Anyways, so okay, and we do want to have this folder before moving the files. So I'm also just going to move this, get rid of this for loop. We don't need a second one, and move this somewhere up here. I will put it after locating the desktop because we're using the desktop variable already. So this needs to be defined before I can do anything with it. So this is a good place for it to be. and then we can move things into this folder. All right, so move the files. Instead of just printing them out, now we're at the final task. And the right thing for that is called the right method. We have another method, and this one is called replace. And what it does is it renames this path to the given path, clobbering the existing destination if it exists, and return a new path instance pointing to the given path. So it's a funny language, but what it essentially says is that it's gonna move the file that you're pointing, like that you're calling this method on, which is gonna be each of our screenshots, and it's gonna put it to a different path. So I need to pass a different path object in here, and that's where it's gonna put it. And if this other path object already exists, then it's gonna override it. So this is just something you need to be aware of when you use this type of function. When you're interacting with your file system, potentially you could mess some stuff up. Like if you have some files inside of this screenshots folder that have the exact same name, then it would actually override it. So just got something to be aware of. Okay, so how do you get it in there? All that you need to do was to get to pass it a new path. So we're saying on the desktop dot join path. We want to do it, put it inside of the screenshots folder, screenshots, and then another join path. Now it also needs a name, right? So you could just give it the same name. You already know how to get that. It's f.name, right? So this would just move them without renaming them. Yes, but you could also pass it a new name in here. So I don't know if we want to do that right now. I guess let's not. We're already over time by quite a bit. But keep in mind that in here, you could also do some renaming. And maybe if you want to build the script by yourself, go ahead and think about how you could do that, right? You could write out the pseudocode and think about whatever, like you would just need to pass it in here as the actual name of the file. Like that's the last part. You can think of it like this is user Martin desktop screenshots. So now you're in the screenshots. At this point, you're inside of the screenshots folder, and then you just need to give a file name. So yeah, using this f variable in here makes sure that that it's every time similar, because if you would pass a simple string in here, if I would say hello, then it would just keep overriding. Like it's going to move them in there and just keeps replacing them. So I would end up with just one final screenshot, the last one that it moved, and it would be called hello. So you got to take care with that. But if I just use the iterator variable here, f, which is going to point always to the screenshot files, then that's fine. And it's just going to give them the same name. And yeah, you could, any sort of code that you would write in here to rename it and then pass it in here would also work to give them a different name. Could you make the screenshot folder a variable and incorporate it in the move files? Yes, of course, you could do that. So I could say, that's fast, I can do that quickly. I can say screenshots like this, yeah. And then I can say screenshots make it, and then I can down here, I could use it. I mean, this doesn't really make it much, doesn't make it much shorter, right? I think you can even like add them to, you could use this slash, to add them together like this as well, but I'm not going to do that now. But yes, this works as well. You can assign it to a variable, and then you can reuse the variable. Same in here. Okay, so the moment of truth, right? I'm going to make this a little smaller so you see the whole code here. It's not a ton of code, right? It's a couple, like it's a lot of comments that you wrote in here, and then there's a few lines, only the colored ones, the not green ones. Optional rename or homework. Okay, but yeah, so this is the whole script essentially, and now when I execute it, you will see that it's going to move all of those files that are sitting here on the desktop not all of the files, not the script itself, not the folder, not the SD card, not this important text, but only the screenshots. It's going to move them into the, oops, we want to watch this. Okay, so ready, set. Let's see. Woo! There they are. Are they gone? No. So here you go. So this script now it just moved everything that was out there inside of this folder. And now if I go ahead, now the nice thing about programming, so this is a one-time effort of building this, right? But now if I go ahead and make a couple of new screenshots. I don't know if you heard that clicking, but I just made a lot of them. So there's a bunch of new screenshots, right? And now I don't need to write anything again. I can just wait until they're finished, run the script again, and whoop, they're gone. They're also inside of here, probably at the bottom. Yeah, so these are the new screenshots. All right, that's all I got for you today. I hope that was fun. I really enjoy this types of programming where you can actually see stuff going on your file system. And yeah, it's not that difficult. And if you're, oh, that's cool. Say hi to Robert. So yeah, it's fun. It's not that difficult to write. Sure, there's always a learning curve, and it depends on where you're coming from always, right? But yeah, if you're interested in programming with Python, we got a bunch of Python training videos that are up on YouTube already. So you can check those out on the channels that are linked above. Maybe Kim or Ryan, you can post them again in case someone's interested to see those. Other got a YouTube channel. We're gonna start that Twitch channel and get it going. And we also have the learning platform where we have a bunch of resources that are available for free. And we also have our courses on there. Of course, if you're interested to work with a mentor, I think it's really nice because you get the personal contact and get someone to walk you through some stuff. So it's really makes getting started and sticking with learning much easier. So if you're interested in that, just get in contact with us. And otherwise, I'm not gonna keep you much longer. We're already over time. But yeah, see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we're gonna go ahead and build a Python script that connects to the internet, like connects to 2 different APIs and gets an image from one and gets maybe some text from another one, and then combines it in the script to create a little website, just a very simple thing. But that's what we're gonna try tomorrow. Okay. All right, thanks for joining everyone, and hope you have still a nice day, and see you around.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know by liking and subscribing. If there's another topic that you'd like to learn more about, leave us a comment. We would love to hear from you. And if you want to become a coding pro, visit our website at codingnomads.co. See you next time.